A very good afternoon, everybody, and I hope that your Monday has gone well. Welcome from St Michael at the Northgate Church here in Oxford. And in our Monday series, we continue to look at interesting characters from history and picking up 7 thoughts about them, using, where possible, their own quotes from their speaking or from their writing. Today it is Harriet Tubman, who lived from 1822 to 1913. She was an American lady, and some of you have asked if I can provide pictures where possible. Here is a photograph of Harriet Tubman, taken just after the American Civil War, in which she played a part, as we will hear in a moment. Harriet Tubman was born and brought up as a slave and was savagely beaten, in fact, as a child, and kept some of those marks all her life. She was able to escape in 1849, and she then went back to rescue her family, help them escape as well. And then as the years went by, she became part of what was known as the Underground Railroad, and her nickname was Moses because of the leading of people from slavery to freedom. And people were moved from safe house to safe house, usually by night, and Harriet Tubman was very much part of that, a leading figure in that. Lots of stories were told, and as ever on these Monday sessions, the point of them, perhaps most of all, is to encourage us to go and find out more afterwards. But just to give you one tiny example, there was one time when she, as an honoured guest in one of the safe houses, was quickly told by the host, please go and sweep our front yard, because then passers-by looking for escaped slaves will think you are a slave and they won't snatch you back. It was often much more dangerous than that, and Harriet Tubman would be leading these groups of people, maybe 6, maybe 11, maybe fewer, maybe more, from safe house to safe house. Initially, it was to the states in America that had outlawed slavery. They were safe places. But then in 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act was passed, which meant that even in those states, escaped slaves could be recaptured. So the only safe place, in fact, to go was Canada, which was part of the British Empire in those days, which had outlawed slavery completely by then. So Harriet Tubman from the southern states up to Canada, it's a long journey. And she led so many groups, so many people to freedom in that way. I came across her when I listened to a protest song many years ago, and it was all about her. She became an icon really very quickly, even during her life, but especially after she died in 1913, as a symbol of someone who helped black people, who helped end slavery, and who helped find freedom for many. During the American Civil War, just after which this picture was taken, she was the first woman to lead an armed attack, an armed expedition. She was very involved on the Unionist side, the northern state side, trying to bring an end to slavery in the southern states. She thought Abraham Lincoln was a little bit slow and vacillating, as we will hear in one of her quotes. Towards the end of her life, she campaigned for women's suffrage. She also set up a home for elderly African American ladies, which she herself ended up in when she grew sick. 7 quick things in a moment, but just an introductory quote from her. I was the conductor of the Underground Railroad for 8 years, and I can say what most conductors can't say. I never ran my train off the track, and I never lost a passenger. Quite an achievement. It also says something about her humour as well. Into our 7 thoughts. First of all, like so many on these Mondays, she had immense perseverance and courage. You may remember that I said that she was beaten often as a child, and she carried those scars all the way through. As well as being beaten, she was once hit by a 2-pound heavy iron weight, which was in fact being thrown at another slave, but it hit Harriet on the head and caused her epilepsy, and she suffered with severe headaches, epileptic spells really throughout her life. So she carried the scars of the past in so many ways all the way through. But she kept going, and this is one of her quotes. And remember, in the context of slaves escaping from their masters who may well be chasing them. If you hear the dogs, keep going. If you see the torches in the woods, keep going. If there's shouting after you, keep going. Don't ever stop. Keep going. If you want a taste of freedom, keep going. As well as perseverance, courage for herself, but also in her encouragement of others, there was much faith in her. She said this: "It wasn't me, it was the Lord. I always told him, I trust to you, I don't know where to go or what to do, but I expect you to lead me, and he always did. And Lord, I'm going to hold steady onto you, and you've got to see me through." And there's that wonderful balance, which is true in so many saints, of trusting in God to see her through, but she knowing that she had to do her bit herself. Willing to be led, but knowing that she must do the journey. Thirdly, the role of the individual. Every great dream begins with a dreamer, and she felt particularly that individuals had to stand up and take their responsibility. And you may remember that I mentioned her words about Lincoln, or her thoughts about Lincoln. And this is what she said. This was when Lincoln wasn't sure whether to go for the anti-slavery card in a big way in the conflict between North and South. Of course, he was to make that stand with enormous significance, but before that he wasn't quite sure. This is what Harriet Tubman said: "Master Lincoln, he's a great man, and I am a poor Negro. But the Negro can tell Master Lincoln how to save the money and the young men. He can do it by setting the Negro free. Suppose that was an awful big snake down there on the floor. He is biting you, folks all scared because you die. You send for a doctor to cut the bite, but the snake he rolled up there, and while the doctor doing it, he bite you again. The doctor dug out that bite, but while the doctor doing it, the snake he spring up and bite you again. So he keep doing it, till you kill him. That's what Master Lincoln ought to know." It's not enough just to wound the snake. Sometimes you have to kill the snake. And for Harriet Tubman, it wasn't enough to make slavery a little bit better. You had to end it. That was the role of the individual, and I began that with every great dream begins with a dreamer. But if we just switch it round to the role of the dream, every great dream. And she had this passion, she had this dream that slaves could be set free, and first of all that she could help them escape into freedom, but then through the power of the northern states they truly could be set free. I wonder what our dreams are, what our passions are. I wonder how we see the role of the individual in helping those dreams come to fruition. And there's always the question whether they are realistic dreams, achievable dreams. How are we going to set about fulfilling the dreams? The role of the dream, the role of the individual. Fifthly, she knew, unsurprisingly, the value of freedom. When she herself escaped in 1849, when she reached Pennsylvania, which is one of the states where slavery had been outlawed, she said this, "When I found I had crossed that line, I looked at my hands to see if I was the same person now I was free. There was such glory over everything. The sun came up like gold through the trees, and I felt like I was in heaven." For those of us who feel entrapped by anything, then maybe that sense of liberation, that sense of freedom can feel indeed like glory and gold. Are we still the same people? Life feels so different. And of course, for those of us who consciously or unconsciously entrap others, then do we realize perhaps what we're taking away from them? As Harriet Tubman knew, Christ said that he had come to set people free indeed. What are we like at receiving freedom in all its forms? And what are we like at ensuring that other people are free too? I was conscious that that little bit sounded a bit preachy, but that's what Harriet Tubman very much would have gone for. She was illiterate, but she learned by hearing stories and telling stories, and was a great teacher. Sixthly, this is about self-awareness, and she realised that often people who were slaves didn't quite see themselves as enslaved. She talked about her own childhood. I grew up like a neglected weed, ignorant of liberty, having no experience of it. She didn't know as a child and as a young adult what it was to be free, and she couldn't even imagine, and almost there were times when she hadn't realised there was this freedom that could be found. Later on, when she was involved in helping slaves to escape, there were some who didn't want to because they weren't aware of what they were missing. She said this: "If I could have convinced more slaves that they were slaves, I could have freed thousands more." One of the terrible things about slavery in all its forms is that occasionally people can get so trapped into it that they do not realise that there can be another way. And lastly, there was tremendous generosity of spirit. She was a formidable person. She carried a gun most of her life and wasn't afraid to use it or to threaten people with it. She was very tough, and all the leading people and all her role in the war and all that she did, there was great toughness there, but there was great generosity of spirit. She said this about slave masters: "I think there's many a slave holder who will get to heaven. They don't know better. They act up to the light they have." And so with her generosity of spirit, she realised that there were some slave owners who did not realise the evil that they were doing, and she was prepared to be generous-hearted to them. 7 brief thoughts there about Harriet Tubman, someone of great courage and perseverance who did so much but carried the scars of her childhood all the way through. Someone of great faith, someone who valued the role of the individual, someone who valued the importance of having good dreams, dreams that can change the world, someone who valued freedom, someone who understood that the self-awareness in people was really important, and it guides how we act, how we respond to situations, and someone with great generosity of spirit, who understood that sometimes people unconsciously oppress as well as consciously. So that was 7 quick thoughts about Harriet Tubman. Thank you so much for listening this afternoon, and blessings on the rest of your day, rest of your evening, whatever you'll be doing. And as ever, whenever you watch this and wherever you watch this, you are very welcome.